Today, we're diving into a really significant document that's been making waves in churches all over the world, the Kairos Palestine document. It's a text that sparks some pretty strong reactions, so it's incredibly important that we understand the full context behind it.
So, let's get right into it. This document came out back in 2009 from a group of Palestinian Christian leaders, and you can see how they frame it as their truth, their story coming directly from their own experiences. And this is where it gets complicated. The document doesn't just tell a story. It calls for some very specific actions, like boycotts. That's why it is so crucial for everyone, especially people in the church, to get the whole picture before just adopting one narrative.
Now, a good place to start, and this might surprise you, is to look at where critics of the document actually find common ground. This isn't just about disagreement. There are some really important shared principles here.
Look at this. At the core, there's the shared belief that it's just plain wrong for one group of people to rule over another. Both sides agree that this kind of domination is morally wrong and that it damages everyone involved.
And here's another huge point of agreement, that deep, natural connection Palestinians have to the land. The critical response doesn't argue with that at all. It simply adds that the Jewish connection is also a natural right. This sets the stage by saying both claims are legitimate and both have to be part of any real solution.
So, if there's agreement on those big ideas, where do the serious disagreements start? Well, it really comes down to some key assumptions the document makes, assumptions that form the very basis for its call to action.
This is a huge promise, right? The idea that this one single action will fix everything and bring peace. But history paints a much more complicated picture, especially when you look at what was happening before 1967.
This timeline is so important. For 2 full decades before Israel's presence in those territories even began, there was intense conflict, violence, and all-out war. So the idea that just going back to the way things were before 1967 would guarantee peace, well, it doesn't quite line up with the historical record.
Here's another big question. The document justifies its call for boycotts by claiming there was an Israeli response refusing any solution. So is that what actually happened? Let's take a closer look at the record.
These are major, well-documented moments in history. You can see these high-stakes attempts at negotiation, with serious offers on the table. This whole side of the story, this record of offers and rejections, is completely absent from the Kairos document.
All right, let's pivot to a really crucial point that causes a ton of confusion, especially when people talk about this conflict. I'm talking about the specific situation in the Gaza Strip.
Now that word, occupation, it's absolutely central to the document's entire argument. It's the reason they give for calling Israel's actions a sin and for demanding international boycotts.
But to really understand what's going on in Gaza, you have to know this year, 2005. This year marks a complete game changer in the situation on the ground.
And I mean a complete and total withdrawal. This wasn't a partial pullback. Every single Israeli military base was dismantled, and every civilian was moved out of the area. It's what's known as the disengagement.
So let's connect the dots here. The document talks about an occupation in Gaza. But the reality is that for well over a decade since 2007, Gaza has been governed by its own local leadership, Hamas. There is zero Israeli presence inside. It's a very different situation from what that word occupation usually brings to mind.
Okay, so we've talked history, we've talked politics, but the document also goes much deeper, making some pretty big theological claims, especially about the land itself and what it means.
To really get what's being debated here, we have to understand this concept. Replacement theology is a viewpoint that most mainstream Christian denominations have actually looked at and formally rejected, seeing it as inconsistent with the Bible and really harmful to Jewish-Christian relations.
So when the document says that God's promises aren't tied to any one people or place, critics see it as a form of this replacement theology. Why? Because it seems to erase a core foundational belief of Jewish faith and history, that specific promises were made about the land of Israel.
And in response, critics point to what they see as an undeniable historical and spiritual record. They argue this connection isn't some modern political claim. It's rooted in a divine promise from the Bible, an unbroken physical presence for millennia, and a massive body of archaeological evidence that confirms Jewish history all across the land.
Okay, so after all this context, the agreement, the historical blind spots, the reality in Gaza, the theological debate, the big question is, what now? What should people in the church actually do with all this?
What's a constructive way forward? The path that many sources suggest is one of fair witness. And what that really means is engaging with the full, complicated truth, not just one side of the story. It means listening to both Israeli and Palestinian stories of pain and hope, recognizing that both peoples have legitimate claims, and working for a negotiated peace, instead of punitive actions that just punish one side.
And ultimately, that's the question we're left with, isn't it? It's a challenge to move past simple narratives and really dig into the hard, complicated work of understanding all sides. And maybe that's the necessary first step for anyone who truly wants to be an agent for peace in this conflict.